And we are back with episode 0003. And by we, I mean me. This is my podcast, but I guess by saying we, it sounds a little bit bigger of a thing than just Andrew Michael Tarr sitting in front of a microphone. Well, I guess if you are listening to this, then we is me and you. And maybe there's even more than one of you. This is my third episode, so I'm guessing there are probably at least a couple 100,000 of you listening. So, what are we going to talk about today? I didn't know when I woke up today, but I realized that it is time for me to make another podcast. I am closing in on a week since my last installment, and I promised myself that I would record at least one podcast a week from here on out. It's kind of a self-imposed deadline, but it is a deadline. And some people don't work well with deadlines. I do. I actually work much better against a deadline than just with my own decision to do something. And I think creatives kind of fall into two camps with that. Some people hate deadlines and it crushes their artistic spirit, and some people love them. I actually have a love-hate relationship with the deadlines. I hate the way they make me feel, but they do get me creating. And a lot of times I sit down to create something and I just can't come up with anything until there's a deadline. And then, miraculously, the ideas start flowing. I'm guessing that most people have a pretty good sense of whether they are a deadline person or a non-deadline person. And maybe you do know. Or maybe you haven't really compared the two before, in which case, hey, maybe you might want to try that. Give yourself an artistic goal and just an open-ended amount of time to do it and see how long it takes you to come up with something. And then give yourself 3 days to do the same thing. That doesn't always work well, though, because a self-imposed deadline kind of feels like it's not really a deadline, at least to me. I've done that before. I've said, okay, I'm going to give myself this 1 week deadline, and the week comes and goes and I can't come up with anything. But if I have something I have to do and other people are paying attention, then somehow the thing gets done. This happens once a year with my friend John Ciccolini. He has an annual birthday party where his friends all show up to the Gardenia, a dinner theater here in LA, and perform something for his birthday. I am the guy who always writes a funny song about John and plays it at the birthday party. And the same thing happens every time. I forget that the party's happening. He calls me about 3 weeks before his birthday and reminds me, and I say, oh yeah, okay, I'll be there. And then I sit down to try to write a song for his birthday. Nothing comes. I put it aside for another week. I try again. I remember, oh yeah, his birthday's coming up, and I try to write something. And again, nothing comes. And then finally, 3 days before the party, I sit down and realize I am up against a deadline. And I might not be able to come up with something this year to play at John's birthday, but somehow I always do. And you would think that I would run out of things to say about my friend John for his birthday, and that the songs would be sort of identical every year, but they end up being wildly different. Mostly because John usually does some crazy, ridiculous thing at least once a year that I can write a song about. And another example of a song I set myself up for having to finish writing by a deadline is a song I just recently recorded and posted on Spotify and Apple Music and all of those places, which I will include a link to in the show notes, is a song I wrote for my kids' school on and for the annual camping trip. I realized a couple days before the trip that a group of dads was all gonna get together and play some songs at the campfire. And I thought, you know what, this is a perfect opportunity for me to write one of my kind of kooky songs about the school. And with the camping trip being only a couple days away, I sat down and churned this thing out within the deadline. And it was kind of a hit, at least amongst the third grade children and their parents on this annual glamping trip. Glamping is the term for glam camping, which I guess this was. Really, all that means is that you are in a cabin with actual running water and electricity, as opposed to sleeping out on the dirt, which these moms and dads would never, ever do. But the glamping trip is a really fun annual thing that we do with both of my kids' grades. And this song has become sort of the unofficial song of the school. And I will include my recording of it at the end of this podcast so you can hear it. I'll also share the Spotify and Apple Music links in the show notes on this podcast's website, thecontentcreatorpodcast.com, which hasn't gone live yet as I'm recording this, but there's a good chance by the time you're hearing it, that website is live. So check it out, thecontentcreatorpodcast.com. This is episode 0003. So I woke up this morning and realized that I'm coming up on the deadline, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about. And then it occurred to me, hey, I can do a podcast about deadlines. And then I realized I had to come up with a sort of semi-clever, punny title to the podcast, because that's what I did for the first two. And at least for now, I plan on trying to be clever with each podcast title. That's probably going to fall by the wayside at some point, but this is only the third episode, so I'm still doing it. So, thus the title, The Night of the Living Deadline. I, Andrew Michael Tarr, being the knight. Okay, so I've given you my suggestion for figuring out if you work well with deadlines. I've talked about how deadlines affect me, but what else can we go into on this podcast? I haven't made any notes to myself, so I'm kind of winging it here. But I guess the first thing that comes to my mind when I think about deadline-related podcast topic is, what are some of the ways that those deadline-friendly people among us, myself included, can artificially create a deadline that feels like a real deadline? I guess some of that is the social pressure thing. People do this with losing weight. They announce to their friends, I'm going to lose 20 pounds by Christmas, or I'm going to stop smoking. And their friends see them lighting up and they say, oh, yeah, that's right, I said I would quit. And I guess that might be what I'm doing here by doing a deadline-related podcast. I hadn't said anything yet about my 1-week ongoing deadline for new podcast episodes, but I'm doing it here. So now that I have put it out there that I'm going to post at least one episode per week, I kind of have to do it. I've backed myself into a wall. And if there's a 2-week gap at some point where I haven't posted a podcast, you're all going to go back and listen to episode number 3 and say, hey, between episodes 9 and 10, Andrew went 11 days without posting. He's lame. So obviously I can't have my listeners or anyone thinking I'm lame. And that is how I'm going to make this deadline stick. I used to do something similar with my high school band, which went on to be my college band, including myself, the bass player Pete, and 2 new members. We had a rule that we would always play at least one new song per gig. So if a gig got lined up, I had to write at least one song before the show. And that was another kind of self-imposed deadline, but because we announced it to the world being the 50 to 100 people who knew we existed, we had to do it. And a pretty sizable percentage of the songs I wrote in high school and college were written under duress. We had a show, I needed a new song for the show, and usually the night before the show, I would write the song, and 2 hours before the show, we would all be running through it 8 or 9 times to minimize the screw-ups. We would never completely eliminate them. Hey, it's a new song, right? But that definitely worked to get me writing. I guess I've known that about myself ever since, that I maybe even need a deadline to create something. So I always look for ways to give myself a deadline and then to pressure myself into actually following the deadline. And that's what I'm doing here. So from here on out, when you look at the posted dates of these podcast episodes, if you're on a platform that shows the date I posted it, I don't actually know if the date shows, I think it does, that you will see if I let a week go by. So I can't do it. I will post something at least once a week. And I made the deadline this time. We'll see if I can do the same thing next week and the week after and the week after. So I guess I will wrap things up for now, but before I do, I just want to remind you that I will be back with episode 0004 in less than a week. And for those of you who do want to hear the song that I wrote for my kids' school, just keep listening for a few more minutes. If you're listening to this podcast sped up, you might want to go back down to 1.0 speed, or you can hear what the song might sound like if I did a Chipmunks album. That's cool too. Either way, enjoy the song. I'm going to sign off now and put the song after my sign off. You're listening to the Content Creator Podcast. I'm Andrew Michael Tarr. Have a great day. We send our kids to Lawrence because we're awesome parents, probably the greatest parents in the world. Yeah, yeah. Lawrence children never try to go to bed too late. And Lawrence children never leave broccoli on their plate. Lawrence children never beg for cookies at Trader Joe's, or put SpongeBob stickers on their baby sister's nose. So we send our kids to Lawrence because we're awesome parents, probably the greatest parents in the world. And we're related to amazing boys and girls. Ooh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Lawrence children never do things that they should not do. Never do things they shouldn't do. Like walk on the sofa when they're covered in glitter glue sticky, yeah. Or hide half-eaten tofu in their mother's favorite shoes. Tofu sticky too. Never in her Nikes now, and not in their Jimmy Choos. We represent the lightning, with kids so great it's frightening, yeah. Their toothpaste is so whitening, they brush their teeth almost every day, make you hurl. Teeth like little rows of pearls. Beautiful sons and daughters. They never fill their super soakers with dirty toilet water. They never drop an anvil off a cliff or put your car on top of a tree, or hand you a candlestick that is actually TNT. They never play with slime, or leave their dirty underwear on the floor all the time. They don't leave dirty underwear on the floor all the time. They never leave their underwear on the floor all the time. They never leave their underwear on the floor all the time. So we send our kids to Lawrence because we're awesome parents, probably the greatest parents in the whole entire world. Oh yeah, we send our kids to Lawrence because we're awesome parents, probably the greatest parents in the world. And we're related to amazing boys and